I kissed him before I even knew his name, and that was perhaps the only truly authentic act of my entire life. As absurd as it sounds, that kiss, stolen in a moment amid a party full of appearances and masks, embedded itself in me as if it marked the beginning of everything. There were no promises, no pretty words, no slow build-up of fairy tales. Just a direct gaze, a silence that lingered longer than it should have, and a closeness that felt inevitable, as if the universe had pushed our bodies toward the same destiny without asking permission. And when our lips met, I knew, without a shred of doubt, that nothing in me would emerge unscathed. My name is Evanna Lyselore. I was born surrounded by luxury, obligations, and expectations, meticulously shaped by generations before me. I grew up watched, guided, polished. I became a woman admired for her composure, her diplomacy, her loyalty to the invisible rules of a world that looks beautiful on the outside, but is made of gilded bars. I always knew what was expected of me, and I always delivered. Until that night. It was supposed to be just another event, another party where my smile was a tool, my presence a symbol, and my absence unthinkable. But there, hidden behind a lace mask and a dress that weighed like armor, for the first time, no one knew who I was. No one called me by my surname, and suddenly I was just a woman among others, breathing deeply, laughing loudly without carrying the world on my shoulders. It was in that space between who I was and who I pretended to be that he appeared. A man with eyes too dark to be indifferent and a voice firm enough to silence the chatter around me. He didn't try to guess my name or seem impressed by my poise. He just looked. He saw me, as if he could see through the mask, through the layers of inherited behaviors, and touch the part of me that was true. I can't explain how it happened. I only know that time stopped, and when our faces drew closer, there was no resistance, only surrender. Kissing him was like falling off a cliff, and instead of shattering, finally finding air in my lungs. But he was gone before I could say anything, as if he'd been just a fragment of a dream. And I returned to the party with trembling lips and a racing heart, trying to ignore the fact that for the first time, I felt truly alive. But the real world was waiting outside, with its cold elegance and decisions already made. The mask came off, the name weighed heavy again, and the question haunted me for nights. Who was he? Because even without a name, a story, or a goodbye, I knew I'd never be able to forget him. In the days that followed, I did exactly what was expected of me. I attended meetings, smiled at events, wore clothes chosen by others, and spoke calculated words to please audiences that never truly listened. But inside, everything about me was different. It was as if that kiss, that brief moment when I was just me, had cracked my armor. Small at first, almost imperceptible. But with each dawn, the crack widened, letting through memories, sensations, desires I no longer knew how to contain. I could still taste him. Not as a romantic memory, but as an undeniable truth. Something in me had awakened, something that no longer fit the life designed for me. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself it was just a moment, a fantasy, a face among many. But it wasn't true. There was something in his gaze I'd never seen in any of the men around. Me. They saw me as part of a project, a piece on a chessboard. He saw me as a person, and no matter how hard I tried to forget, every detail of that night seemed tattooed in my memory. The warmth of his skin when our hands brushed by accident, the way his breath hitched before the kiss, the faint tremor in my own fingers when I realized, for the first time, I was doing something no one had told me to do. For the first time, I chose. But no one could know, not in that world, not with the surname I carried. It was inconceivable for a Lyselore to kiss a stranger, let alone carry that kiss in her heart like a precious secret. My parents resumed talk of alliances, names, dates, a potential fiancé with a real estate empire, another with $1 billion fund in Washington, all perfect on paper, all utterly empty. I found myself trapped in a game I'd always known how to play, but now I no longer wanted to play. I began to see how much of me was numb, how much of my existence was an elegant, rehearsed repetition of what was expected of me. And then came the night I almost spoke. I almost confessed to my mother that I'd kissed an unknown man at a masked ball, and that the kiss wouldn't leave my soul. But when I opened my mouth, I saw in her eyes the old expectation, the same one that had haunted me since childhood, the desire for perfection, for control, for legacy, and the words died before they were born. I smiled, as always, said everything was going well, that I'd understand the responsibilities that came with the name I bore. But inside, something screamed, because I knew, without a shred of doubt, that my life would never be the same. All because of a kiss that lasted seconds, but carried the echo of everything I'd ever wanted to be. It was on an ordinary morning that I felt the real weight of that night. I was in front of the mirror, as always, with my team adjusting every strand of hair, every fold of the dress, every inch of the image the world expected to see. But for the first time, it made me nauseous. The reflection felt strange, distant, as if I was seeing another woman, a polished, obedient version, sculpted to please, but one that no longer belonged to me. The Evanna who lived that kiss, who felt the world stop as a stranger's lips touched hers, no longer fit there. It was a suffocating feeling, being surrounded by everything and still empty inside. It was as if my body was present, but my soul had stayed at that party. With him, I finished getting ready in silence, ignoring the looks seeking my approval. I nodded, posed for photos, got into the official car, and went where I was told to be. But throughout the entire journey, my mind was elsewhere. I relived that night with every heartbeat, not just the kiss, but everything it awakened. It was more than desire. It was recognition, a reunion with a part of me I didn't even know existed. And the more time passed, the harder it became to pretend nothing had happened. I couldn't unsee what I saw in his eyes. I couldn't unlearn the taste of freedom. At the end of that day, alone in my room, I took off the dress slowly. I stood barefoot by the open window, watching the city fall asleep under a gray sky. And there, amid the silence of distant lights and the whisper of the wind, I understood. It didn't matter if I never found out who he was, because he had already left a mark on me, not on my body, but on my consciousness. And now that I'd felt what it was to be truly seen, to surrender by choice, there was no going back. The life I'd lived until then was starting to unravel, and even if I didn't know what came next, something inside me had already chosen. At first I thought it was just a persistent memory, a recollection that, like all others, would eventually dissolve with time. But the days began to carry his taste in everything. In every place I entered, I hoped to see him. In every face that crossed mine, I searched for similar features, as if my body were trying to find him before my mind admitted it. And that's what scared me most. I didn't know him, and yet he inhabited me with the force of someone who had always been there. A stranger who took nothing and still left everything. Began to notice how my life was silently crumbling, not from the outside in, that would take time, but inside, there was no longer any foundation. I went through the protocols, smiled at events, nodded in meetings, but something in me was absent, as if, since that kiss, what once filled me was no longer enough. I started questioning everything in secret, the decisions others made for me, the multiplying obligations, the shallow conversations that passed through me like wind. Everything felt empty, like a rehearsed play I no longer wanted to perform. One afternoon, I received a message from my father. He wanted to discuss the official date for announcing my engagement to the heir of an allied family. The tone was dry, direct, as if it were a business contract. And as I read it, I felt a surge of near desperate panic. My entire body recoiled at the idea as if it were a sentence. It wasn't fear of the man in question. It was the terror of losing myself for good, of extinguishing what that kiss had ignited, of never feeling that kind of truth again. That night, instead of following the script laid out for me, I took the car and drove aimlessly, as if my feet knew what my consciousness still refused to admit. I needed to find something. Or someone. The steering wheel gripped tightly, eyes fixed on the road, and heart at war. I drove until the city lights began to thin, until buildings gave way to open space and noise to silence. And there, in the middle of nowhere, I stopped, opened the window, closed my eyes, breathed as if I were alive for the first time in days. And I cried. I cried without shame, cried with anger, with longing, with the frustration of someone carrying two worlds on their shoulders, the one given to them and the one that could have been. And in that raw solitude, I whispered to the wind a question burning inside me. Where are you? Not expecting an answer, but because for the first time I was admitting what I'd never dared say aloud. I wanted him back. I wanted to see him, to look into his eyes without masks, to ask why he vanished, why that kiss felt so much like fate. It was during a formal dinner, one of those I could navigate on autopilot, that something shifted. The lights, the glasses, the forced smiles, the recycled topics. Everything followed the usual script until a name, spoken across the table, snapped me out of my daze. It was a common, almost banal name, but something in the tone, or perhaps the silence that followed, made my body tense. A new guest, an entrepreneur, recently arrived in the city, involved in discreet but impactful projects. He'd be at the charity event the following week, and before I could stop myself, my heart was already racing ahead of reason, weaving dangerous hopes. The days that followed were a battle. Part of me tried to convince the other that it meant nothing, that the name might not be his. That expectation was a trap. But there was something, an intuition burning quietly, like a candle lit in a dark corner of my soul. I began to imagine the possibility, and with it came fear and guilt. What would I say if it was him? How would I look into his eyes after so long, after that kiss that for me had become eternal? The event arrived, and with it, panic disguised as calm. I wore the dress chosen for me, slipped on the right shoes, pinned my hair with the usual clips. Outwardly, I was the picture of serenity. Inwardly, a whirlwind. When I arrived, I was greeted with the usual air kisses, compliments, speeches, but my eyes, ravenous, scanned the room for a face, the face. And then, as if time were playing with me, I caught a glimpse of a familiar profile. Tall, broad shoulders, the same way of crossing his arms. My heart stumbled in my chest. He was standing with his back to me, talking to a small group. And even without seeing his face, my body reacted with the same feverish certainty of that night. It wasn't my memory playing tricks. It was him, alive, present, real. Something in me broke in that moment, a dam that had held firm for too long. The ground didn't shake, no one noticed, but inside me everything had changed. I wanted to run to him and disappear at the same time. I wanted answers, and I feared them all. Our eyes met minutes later when he turned casually, not imagining I was there. His expression froze for a second, maybe less. But it was enough for me to see. He recognized me, not as one recognizes someone from the past, but as one rediscovers a scar on their own body, a scar that never truly healed. And then he looked away, returned to his conversation, as if it were nothing, as if I were just another elegant presence in that room full of important names. But I saw, I felt, and in that instant I knew he hadn't forgotten either. I tried to stay composed, to feign control, to smile at the faces around me, as if I hadn't just been knocked off my axis. But it was futile. He was there, breathing the same air as me, with the same eyes that had once pierced mine like both a blade and a shelter. And now, after all this time, we pretended not to see each other, that we didn't have a past encapsulated in a kiss that, for me, lasted far longer than seconds. It lasted years. It was still lasting. And even there, amid speeches, toasts, and cameras, everything in me screamed for a reunion. Not one resolved with a, "How are you?" but one that demanded silence, steady eyes, and a soul willing to bare itself. The night dragged on. I tried to maintain composure, but with every minute I felt more absent from myself. And then, as if fate had grown tired of our cowardice, it happened. I was alone for a brief moment near the outdoor garden, away from the flashes and the orchestra. And I heard footsteps. I knew they were his before I even saw him. And when I turned, he was already there. No mask, no pretense, just him. As in that stolen moment that never stopped haunting me. We stared at each other for seconds that felt like an eternity. Neither of us said anything, because we knew any word spoken too soon would break what that moment was trying to build. "So it was you," he said finally, his voice deeper than I remembered, a little more tired but still familiar. "It was me," I replied. Simple as that, and for a moment neither of us smiled. Neither tried to soften the impact, because there was no way to. That reunion was like opening a box sealed for too long, inevitably painful. "I looked for you," he confessed, and his eyes wavered for an instant. "But I didn't even know where to start. I didn't know your name." "And I knew too much," I retorted, my voice nearly breaking. "Enough to know I couldn't look." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full, dense. It was the space between two, worlds about to collide. He took a step forward, but still with respect, as if he knew he held a fragile past in his hands. "I thought you were a dream," he murmured. "One of those that leaves longing without explanation." "So did I confessed. But the problem with dreams is that sometimes you wake up wanting to live inside them. And there, with the distance shrinking and wounds surfacing, I realized how much he too carried that kiss. Not as a teenage memory, but as an anchor, as a starting point never explored. He didn't ask why I left. He didn't demand explanations, but his eyes asked everything, and mine answered. The life awaiting me the next day seemed more distant than ever. It was as if, in finding him again, I'd crossed an invisible line from which there's no return. It was no longer just about him, or the kiss, or the persistent memory. It was about me, about what I'd become since then, about the woman who'd learned to navigate expectations, but now knew she'd never fit them again without breaking something inside. In the days that followed, we saw each other more than once, not in secret, though everything felt clandestine, but with a delicacy that needed no haste. There was so much to say, and at the same time, an almost sacred care not to tarnish what that moment meant. He was different from what I'd imagined, and at the same time, exactly as I remembered. He didn't have the glamour of the names presented to me as potential husbands. No titles, no inheritances, no political alliances. But there was a wholeness in him that no one else had offered. He didn't want to possess me or mold me. He just wanted to see me, and being seen by him was like being read aloud for the first time. For the first time, my presence wasn't required. It was felt. It wasn't used. It was welcomed. We talked for hours, about everything, about nothing, about the night of the kiss, about the lost time, about the lives we led afterward. There was hidden hurt in the corners, of course, but no demands. We were two survivors of a story that never had time to happen, and now, for the first time, it was breathing. But the world outside didn't sleep. The pressure grew. My parents began to suspect. The invitations intensified. The looks, the subtle warnings, the reminders that my role was already set. And I felt more and more that I had to choose, not between him and others, but between myself and everything that pulled me away from myself. And as simple as the decision might seem to someone who's never lived trapped, I knew it wouldn't be painless, because all freedom carries a price, and mine would be disappointing everyone who expected a perfect princess. Being called ungrateful, impulsive, irresponsible, all of it. But it would also be the start of something I'd never had. Truth. One night, without warning, I knocked on his door. No gala dress, no driver, no name. Just me, with loose hair, trembling breath, and a willing heart. When he opened the door, I didn't ask if I could come in. I just said, "I'm tired of hiding, even from myself." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He pulled me in with strength, with care, and hugged me as if he'd been saving that gesture since the night of the ball. There in his arms, I understood that the kiss I never forgot wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of everything. And now, I was ready to live what fate had tried to prevent. Not as a princess, but as a woman, as Evanna, whole, imperfect, free. Today, when people ask who I am, I don't cite surnames or titles. I just say, I'm the one who once kissed a stranger and was never the same. Because in that kiss, there was more than desire. There was truce. There was freedom. He didn't save me. He reminded me I could save myself. And when I finally chose what I felt, not what was expected of me, I stopped being just the daughter, the heiress, the public figure. I became a woman. I became the owner of my story. I no longer need to hide behind masks. Today, I kiss without fear, look into eyes without asking permission, and walk my path without needing anyone's approval. Because love, when it's real, doesn't bind, it liberates. And mine began with a kiss, and continues every day with the choice to stay.